In the middle of the 15th century, England stood on the edge of chaos. For decades, the kingdom had been fighting in the long and exhausting 100 Years' War against France. The war had drained the crown's treasury, weakened the authority of the monarchy, and divided the English nobility. But the real problem was not outside the kingdom. It was inside. England was ruled by a king who could barely rule at all. King Henry VI had inherited the throne as a child. Unlike the powerful warrior kings who ruled before him, Henry was quiet, deeply religious, and completely uninterested in politics or war. Many nobles believed he lacked the strength needed to control a restless kingdom. Behind the throne, powerful families were already competing for influence, land, and power. And among them, two houses stood above all others: the House of Lancaster and the House of York. Both claimed a legitimate right to the English crown. Both commanded powerful allies, and both believed the throne rightfully belonged to them. What began as a political rivalry would soon turn into one of the bloodiest civil wars in English history. A conflict so brutal, so filled with betrayals and shifting alliances, that centuries later, it would inspire one of the most famous fantasy stories ever written. This was the War of the Roses. King Henry VI officially ruled England, but real power often rested in the hands of the kingdom's powerful nobles. Henry struggled with leadership. He avoided conflict, rarely made strong decisions, and depended heavily on advisors to govern the kingdom. At the same time, England was losing its territories in France. Victories won by earlier kings were slowly slipping away, damaging the reputation of the crown. As frustration grew, many nobles began questioning whether Henry was capable of ruling at all. One of those nobles was Richard, Duke of York. Richard was ambitious, intelligent, and descended from royal blood. Through his lineage, he believed he had a legitimate claim to the throne if Henry failed to rule effectively. At first, Richard did not openly challenge the king. Instead, he demanded reform. He argued that corruption within the royal court was destroying England's stability and that the king's advisors were abusing their power. But tensions grew quickly. Then something happened that pushed the kingdom closer to disaster. In 1453, King Henry VI suffered a complete mental collapse. For over a year, he was unable to speak, rule, or even recognize those around him. England suddenly had a king who could not govern, and someone needed to take control. Richard, Duke of York, was appointed protector of the realm, but when the king recovered, the balance of power shifted again, and the rivalry between the houses of York and Lancaster began to turn into open hostility. In 1455, the tension finally exploded. Armies loyal to the House of York and the House of Lancaster clashed in what would become the first major battle of the conflict, the Battle of St. Albans. It was fast, brutal, and decisive. For the first time in English history, powerful nobles were openly fighting each other for control of the crown. The Yorkist forces defeated the Lancastrian army, capturing several important royal supporters. For Richard, Duke of York, it was a major victory. But it did not end the conflict. Instead, it marked the beginning of a civil war that would last for decades. Across England, nobles began choosing sides. Some supported the ruling House of Lancaster and King Henry VI. Others supported Richard of York and his growing claim to the throne. Battles broke out across the country. Castles changed hands. Families were divided. And the English crown itself became the ultimate prize in a deadly struggle for power. The war intensified as both sides gathered larger armies. Richard of York continued pressing his claim to the throne. Eventually, he went even further, openly declaring that he had a stronger right to rule than Henry VI. This was a shocking move. For many nobles, it crossed the line from rebellion to outright treason. The Lancastrian supporters responded quickly. In 1460, Richard of York marched north with his army, hoping to secure his position. But near Wakefield, everything went wrong. Lancastrian forces surrounded York's army. The battle that followed was short and brutal. Richard of York was killed on the battlefield. His defeat seemed to end the Yorkist cause, but the war was far from over, because Richard's son was ready to continue the fight. His name was Edward, and he would soon become one of the most powerful kings England had ever seen. Edward, the eldest son of Richard of York, was everything his father had been and more. Tall, charismatic, and an exceptional battlefield commander, he quickly rallied the Yorkist supporters. In 1461, Edward faced the Lancastrian army in one of the largest and bloodiest battles ever fought on English soil, the Battle of Towton. Snow fell heavily across the battlefield as tens of thousands of soldiers clashed. Archers filled the sky with arrows. Knights fought hand-to-hand in brutal combat. By the time the battle ended, thousands lay dead, but the Yorkists had won. Edward marched into London and was crowned king. He became King Edward IV. For the first time, the House of York sat on the English throne. But peace would not last long, because in the world of medieval politics, loyalty could change overnight, and one of Edward's closest allies was about to betray him. Richard Neville, known to history as the Earl of Warwick, had been one of Edward's most important supporters. He was incredibly wealthy, politically powerful, and known as the Kingmaker because he had helped place Edward on the throne. But their alliance did not last. Edward made decisions Warwick strongly disagreed with, especially regarding marriage and foreign alliances. Feeling betrayed and ignored, Warwick turned against the king he had helped create. In an astonishing twist, Warwick allied himself with the Lancastrian cause. England was once again thrown into chaos. Rebellions erupted. Armies marched again. For a brief moment, Henry VI was restored to the throne. But Edward was not finished. He returned to England with an army. In 1471, the two forces met in battle again. Warwick was killed, and Edward reclaimed his throne. The House of York ruled England once more. After Edward IV's death, the kingdom once again fell into uncertainty. His young son was supposed to inherit the throne, but before the boy could be crowned, Edward's brother seized power. He became King Richard III. Many believed Richard had removed his young nephews to secure the crown. The princes disappeared from the Tower of London and were never seen again. The mystery shocked the kingdom. Richard's rule quickly became controversial, and across the sea, a new challenger prepared to invade: Henry Tudor. In 1485, Henry landed in England with a small army. He marched inland until his forces met Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. The battle would decide the future of England. During the fighting, Richard charged directly toward Henry in a desperate attempt to kill him and end the war. But the attack failed. Richard III was killed on the battlefield. With his death, the long civil war finally came to an end. Henry Tudor was crowned King Henry VII. To unite the rival houses, he married Elizabeth of York. The Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York were combined into a single symbol: the Tudor Rose. After decades of war, betrayal, and bloodshed, England was finally united again. But the War of the Roses would forever remain one of the most dramatic and violent struggles for power in English history. A real-life story that rivals even the greatest tales of fantasy.